Hey, sir. I just came out of listening to the meeting of the team. We actually just finished that programming analysis that discusses whether Steve Jobs is better than Bill Gates. So I don't know. Did you want to go ahead and discuss that now?
Yes, let's go speak about that in a more comfortable place.
5 minutes later.
Wow. Thank you, Elon. Yes, Elon, this is a lot more comfortable. Well, yeah, so I don't want to take too much of your time. I know you're a busy man sending men to the moon, or to Mars. You're sending Dogecoin to the moon, self-driving cars, all that. I know you're a busy man, so you probably don't have time to go over the financial performance of different companies. So we set out to create a model for you, a program for you that would analyze these companies just based on their tickers, and even go a little bit further in depth with that analysis. So with that being said, today we're going to be going over the performance from 2018 to 2021 of both Apple and Microsoft. And yeah, so my name is Travis.
I'm Kate Dombrowski.
I'm Brandon Farley.
I'm Nicholas Sebastian Potter Lopez.
My last name is Choi. Travis Kaimana Choi. All right. So with that being said, let's jump right into it here. So the agenda for today, we're going to start off with the question, the challenge that we were given. We're going to follow that up with the data source and discuss, where we got the information, where we got the financial statements, the balance sheets, and everything that we're using to analyze these companies. Next, we're going to go over the problems that we faced. There were a few hiccups that we found, both some that we couldn't figure out and mostly ones that we could figure out. Followed with that, probably the most important part is going to be the findings. We're going to discuss the metrics that we that we scraped from the websites, but also the ones that we determined ourselves through calculations. And we're also going to discuss how those different metrics apply to each one of these companies as well as their performance. And lastly, we're going to follow it up with the conclusions that we found, as well as any recommendations that we have. So that being said, the challenge that we were faced with was how can we scrape something like Yahoo Finance for balance sheets, for income statements, for any other kind of company information that would give us insight on how the company is doing performance-wise, as well as taking that financial and stock metrics and going a little bit more in-depth for different companies. One of the biggest challenges was to be able to do this efficiently by just entering in the ticker. We can do the challenge was to do this with any company possible, both big and small, and be able to analyze them and compare them with one another. So with that being said, Nick, if you want to go ahead and talk about the data source.
Thank you, Travis. We decided to go ahead with Yahoo Finance because we found it was an easy way to tie all the data together in a comprehensive format that also simplified it in a way that was readable and comparable with other metrics as well. From Yahoo Finance, we were able to put all of our data into Panda data tables, and from there, we were able to manipulate and append them in order to do our calculations directly into the data set that is brought from Yahoo Finance. This is in opposition to the other options that are available, which leads us to our problems. Originally, we were trying to use Edgar to find our financial data. Edgar is the SEC's tool for finding financial data, and this is all reported by public companies whenever earnings calls are released. And from Edgar, investors are able to find the balance sheet, income statement, and cash flow statement, and make informed decisions. Now, the issue with Edgar is that every company reports differently. So there might be line items that are missing from one company or they're in place for another company. But that's an issue when we're trying to build a Python module that can go through and analyze the data and calculate financial ratios. We would have to do it one by one. So we were able to bypass this by using Yahoo Finance. And Yahoo Finance collects the data, which is up to date, from Edgar directly, and then we access Yahoo Finance, which acts as a middleman, in order to manipulate the data on our ends. Now, let's move on to the essential balance sheet information.
So like you mentioned, one of the biggest issues is that YFinance, the function we ended up using in our program, only gives us the bare minimum of the balance sheet and the income statement, just the surface level information. The problem with this is, although it gives us things like profitability or profits, revenue, even things like liabilities and assets, it doesn't give us the ratios that we want. And the thing that makes this so important is with ratios, we're able to compare large companies with smaller companies as well. So what we did is we took the information, that surface level information that we were given, and we used those calculations. We appended the pandas, we created new columns and subsets in order to create those ratios. And so through those calculations, we found a bunch of different information. In this case, just to give you, a little glimpse of what the kind of information we can get, we decided to go with the current ratio, as well as the working capital, and lastly, the debt to equity ratio. So with that being said, we're going to go ahead and start discussing the findings, beginning with the current ratio.
Yeah, so the first metric and ratio that we decided to analyze was the current ratio. The current ratio basically looks at how a company can take care of their short-term liabilities with their current assets. For most companies that based on our research, a 1.5 to a 3.0 current ratio is what's considered ideal across all industries. Although within each specific industry, those ideal ratios can differ, slightly lower to slightly higher than that 1.5 to 3.0 range. So as you can see from what we pulled from our data, Apple seems to trend more onto that lower end of that comfortable range. They trend from around 1.1 to 1.5. And as for Microsoft, they trend towards the higher end of that ratio, that 2.0 to 2.5. What you can take from this is that Microsoft is in a slightly stronger position to cover any unpredicted short-term liabilities that may come up during the year, any unknown issues that may come up. They may need to buy more inventory, or may need to cover some unknown expenses, even maybe natural disasters. All these types of things can be covered by those current assets. And as we look at the graphs that our data pulled, you can see that Apple was trending upward, though still in that lower range from 2018 to 2020, and then right around the end of 2019, beginning of 2020, they began to trend downward quite aggressively. Microsoft started much higher at almost 3.0 in 2018, trended downwards, kind of leveled out between 2019 and 2020, but then began to trend downward as well. As far as analyzing these graphs, Microsoft again seems to be in a much more comfortable position to cover known expenses and unknown liabilities that may come up during the year based on this ratio. So we find it as a good ratio to analyze the company's ability to successfully operate in the future. Now I'll pass on to Kate for working capital.
Thanks, Brennan. So the second metric that we calculated was working capital. Our equation for this was subtracting liabilities from assets. What working capital means is it's basically the leftover money that each of the companies have to use for short-term liabilities, such as paying off short-term debt or purchasing inventory. And for working capital, there's no specific number that tells you if it's good or bad, but from the numbers, we can see that Microsoft has a much larger working capital, and this just means that they'll have extra money laying around in case of an unfortunate event or something else going wrong in the company where they need the extra cash. So for working capital to be good, it just has to be positive, and we can see it in both of these companies that all of the numbers are positive. As you can see from the graph of Apple's working capital, it has increased up until around May of 2019 and then decreases after that. And then as for Microsoft, it decreases until May of 2019. Within that year, increases a little bit, and then starting in 2021, we can see that that has a much sharper decline. Now I'll pass it off to Travis to talk to debt to equity ratio.
Thank you. So another one of those important ratios we're going to discuss is the debt to equity ratio. Essentially, this is telling us the ratio between the total liabilities to the total stockholder equity. So to put it into simpler terms, if we take a look at Apple here, basically for every dollar that they're funded with through stockholder equity, they're getting about $2, a little bit over $2 in liabilities, whether that's from banks, other companies, bonds, whatever it is. Essentially what this is telling us is how risky a company is, because it tells us, how we're spending our money, how we're receiving our money. So basically what we're doing is we're taking the total liabilities divided by the total equity, and we can see that Apple has a little bit higher of debt to equity ratio, meaning that they're a little bit riskier. They're receiving more money from liabilities and less from the stockholders themselves. Money that not necessarily both have to be paid back, obviously, but liabilities are a little bit more riskier of a funding source. So if we take a look at the graphs here, we can see that Apple is starting to stray away from their original round 2 level that they were at, while Microsoft is starting to head down. So similar to working capital, or similar to the current ratio, there is different levels that are considered good debt to equity ratios. Because Apple and Microsoft are both in the same sector, it makes it kind of easy to compare them. For the information technology sector, the one that Apple and Microsoft are both in, we can see that a good ratio is considered 1 to 1.5, which is what Apple is starting to stray away from and Microsoft is starting to approach. So to put into simpler terms yet again, Apple is seeming to be worse when it comes to debt to equity, and Microsoft is starting to be a little bit better. As we can see, they're starting to enter that 1 to 1.5 zone come 2021. So moving on here, we just discussed some balance sheet information. We also wanted to go over some quick income statement information as well. Similar to the balance sheet, we were just given the surface level information about the income statement itself. So we wanted to jump in a little bit deeper and go over some ratios that make it a little bit easier to analyze the company. So again, we created some subsets and columns inside the pandas itself in order to create those that information. So in this case, we decided to take a look at operating margin. We're just going to stick with the one just because we don't want to waste too much of your time, Elon. So to go over that, we're going to pass it off to Nick yet again.
Thank you, Travis. So operating margin is operating income divided by total revenue. This is a very important metric for evaluating how a company will use the sales that they're bringing in and the money that they're generating to pay off their expenses. So in general, you can see that Apple's is increasing and then takes a dip and then increases very sharply. This is very interesting because normally you would want to see the operating margin on an increasing basis, just like Microsoft on the right. Now, operating margin is also a very good metric to make sure that your company is doing the right things in terms of management using the right things or using resources effectively or successfully completing a new marketing campaign. All these things can increase operating margin, which is the goal. And after COVID, Apple has been doing just that, as you can see from the operating margin skyrocketing after 2020. Now, let's talk about the stock prices of Apple.
So as you can see here from the graph derived from our code, the general trend for Apple's stock price is clearly upward. There are some notable dips, specifically between January 2020 and July 2020. At first glance, we may assume that that is related to the COVID-19 pandemic. What we, during our research, have thought is that taking these metrics that we've used to analyze just these two companies from over a 4-year period, we may be able to take these ratios and these values and analyze daily stock price changes and see how changes in the daily ratios may affect buyer behavior and investors' behavior into these stocks that would in the long term affect the stock price. Similarly, Microsoft stock takes a dip in that same period, and so we think that with further analysis of the current ratio, the debt to equity ratio, and looking at these numbers, we could not only take this code and use it for any company, big or small, to analyze how their changes in their financial data affect their daily stock prices, but you can also use it to compare large companies like this and see why would there be a similar trend in a negative a downward trend in the stock price.
Yeah, so overall we were really impressed by what we found by using the yfinance data. The most interesting thing is that you can use any ticker code and plug it into our formula, and it'll give you a live updated information of all of the financial metrics that we've calculated.
Adding on to that, like she mentioned, this program can actually be continued to use. Although yfinance isn't continuously updated, we can have continuously updated from Yahoo Finance itself. So come 2022, if we want to go ahead and run this program again, we can continue to compare companies big or small. If we wanted to go more in depth even, we could create an array of several different tickers, throw our program into a loop, and just compare them all almost instantaneously. So I think that's part of the biggest part of our program. We want to thank you again for your time, Mr. Elon. Obviously, to your question about whether Bill Gates or Steve Jobs is superior, I think we all came to decide that it's pretty inconclusive and also kind of irrelevant because, as we all know, you, in fact, are the king of stocks. Dogecoin to the moon. Thank you for your time, Elon.
You should totally take Python next year. You get to meet Elon Musk, and he's a total babe.
Dude, it's gonna be so cold.
Floundering like a fish.
Let us know when. 1, 2.